Hey, it's KR from D&D Homebrew talking today about the one-room dungeon. And there's a couple of reasons I thought of this video. One, the classic thing everyone talks about is the five-room dungeon, which evolved out of the old mega dungeon concept with, hundreds of rooms or multiple levels. And for my playing days, those were the beginnings of D&D. Then they evolved into a five-room or 10-room sort of much more constrained environment. But I did occasionally create a one-room dungeon. And the other reason is I'm doing a series on my Patreon, which I'll put a little link to the Patreon here, a little self-promotion. I'm so good at that. And I'm going to do a series of one-room dungeons because I think there's a lot of, fruitful ideas. There's a lot of inspiration that comes from creating a one-room dungeon and thinking about how it's going to work. Because the first kind of concept here that I have is constraint breeds creativity, right? You just have one room to figure out what is going to happen when the players are in this room. Every aspect of the environment becomes potentially part of the story. If you have a room, a single room, some entrance that goes in and here's this room, or it's down beneath the keep. I had one where there was a secret door, ran down, and then here was a single room. Sometimes a chute leads. I mean, again, the mind rule. You have a single room, and it has a pool in the room, center of this room. Players come in there, they know something's in that pool, or what's that pool about, or if it's not, what's the water about? And they know instantly that every aspect of this room, anything that's on the walls and on the floor, any symbols, any rooms, it's a single room, especially if they have time. Again, maybe not, maybe boom, something happens. But they need to explore this single room, and everything is going to be contained. This is like a short story as opposed to a novel. And in a short story, you condense the action, you condense the characterizations. You're not going into lengthy interior monologues unless that's all it is as a short story. You've got this constrained thing, and you've got to think about every aspect of what's in this room. And another aspect of this kind of a second principle is oftentimes, not always, but oftentimes, time replaces space as kind of the overriding theme when you have a one-room dungeon. Because in a large dungeon, you use physical movement from place to place to breed tension. Going down hallways, listening at doors, what's over there. Here, it's one single room. The players enter this room, and what's going to happen? There is a tension in, something is about to happen, and something potentially very deadly. So instead of where do we go next or whatever, it's like, what do we do now to avoid some catastrophe? The thing starts to fill with water. Sonic blasts begin, or creepy whispers grow, and the players are getting uneasy. And there's, rooms on the walls or on the floors that they have to figure out, perhaps to escape this single room. Because again, how do they get in? Like the chute that leads down, maybe it's really difficult to get back up, and suddenly these things start happening, and they've got to make decisions very fast. So it's constrained, and it's also can often be time dependent. And the other thing is that you want to have multiple points of interaction within this single room. So you want to put different physical objects, you want to put an altar, a pool, a throne, furniture, but also the geometry of this thing. We could have different layers, right, within the room itself. You can have, a balcony that runs around the thing. It doesn't have to go into other areas because that's more than one room, right? But still, what was going on in this room? What was happening here that they had this balcony? This throne, this pool? Multiple points of interest within this set single room geometry. And what will happen is, depending on how things are getting in or out of this room, some kind of teleportation thing, some sort of, battle thing where you teleported here, the old Star Trek. I bet 10 Remulax on the newcomers, right? So now everything in the room becomes this battlefield. Are there items to be used? Does it look like we can't possibly beat these things? Well, there's all sorts of stuff around. What's on the throne? What's in those shelves? What does that symbol mean on the wall? Because again, you have that time factor. Now you have this in constrained space, and you're going to have to use every aspect of this room, all the stuff that you've put in there to get themselves out of this situation. And what this correlates to is the purpose of a single room dungeon, if in fact it was built as a single room. Because that single room can be quite large, right, with the balconies around it. An arena, it could be the size of a coliseum if you choose, still a single room. Or it can be as small as a prison cell. I mean, again, if you have a party, it has to be, well, maybe, but large enough to put them in there. And this becomes part of this purpose. Like, how did the players get there? And what is expected of them? Can they just leave, or do they have to do something to get out? Because I often think, so for instance, I had this thing with, um, you were sent into this thing where they had the balcony around it, these sort of shimmering light things that were watching. They were formless. And they had you fight shadows, shadow gladiators of yourself, right? You basically were although they could, you were basically fighting your own party in a way and using the tactics. And the shadow creatures at first didn't quite understand what you were doing, but then they got really good because they were super smart and they could manipulate them. And it was just a test to see what you would do when faced with your own, yourself, right? A struggle, again, all the metaphoric stuff or whatever. But that's where you have this, it's an arena and the players have to fight to get their way out. Because again, if you just have a single room where there's a mystery or a puzzle, you can just walk into some cave entrance and it goes in and here's this single room. It might be a tomb, it might be a throne, and obviously things are gonna are gonna happen very quickly. The tomb, the ghosts arise, or the mummies, or whatever. And the classic is to have a big slab of stone come down across the entrance. You've entered my tomb. Now join me. That kind of thing. So notice there is a theme of when you're in this single room environment, you sometimes feel like, oh, I gotta make them trapped there, but it doesn't have to be always. Another one is it can be a natural thing, not just a single cave, but I had this giant tree with a hollowed out center in this glade. And, you go inside and it was really massive or something like that, but where you go in and it's extra dimensional. It's way bigger inside the tree than it is when you go around. And it's a single thing, and it's the sacred heart of the forest or something like that. Some entity might live there. There might be a pool in there where you can look and see things that are happening, scrying, see events of the future, of the past. So that isn't so much you got to fight to stay alive, get out or fight things or whatever, or ghosts or anything, but it's that there's information here, and how do you extract that information, and how do you do it in such a way that you don't offend whatever is there, or do you only get one chance, you get 3 questions and all that kind of stuff. You got to find your way, you got to enter this, but all you need is one room for this kind of thing. And it can be just as big as the tree, especially if you have a gigantic tree, as big as a house or something. It has a single room in it, and you get there and you have to, ask the right questions or bring the right offerings or however it's going to work such that it gets the players information. Maybe it's a reward. Maybe they bring the sacred heart, some ember that's been stolen in the forest is slowly dying, and they return it to its rightful place in the great tree, and they have success. But again, typically, that can be the end goal. So it's kind of flavor world. But I actually kind of like it when there's something they still have to do, or an enemy has been waiting for them in the sacred tree. The other thing about a single room is you can have an effect, like an anti-magic shell, let's just say, that kind of makes sense if it's just within one area. And again, a single room can be, 100 by 100, but the point is that in this area, there's a magic effect, or there's an arcane kind of curse, or there's some effect. Again, when you're thinking of the environment on these things, if the terrain is difficult, there's obscuring mist, all sorts of things that make it trickier. There's things that, it's blackness, true darkness, depending on your system, but a lot of them have different levels of darkness and things that can see, that kind of stuff. And you've got to get to the end of the room. You enter in or are teleported. You got to get to the other side to do that. And, these things are coming at you. Or again, you're solving puzzles or putting together things from tapestries and connecting things. And you've got some information of what I speak to at the throne of the gods or something. Another thing I tend to think of is that single rooms can be either, like I said, in the tree or a cave or whatever, but also kind of extra dimensional. I just did a video a little while ago on pocket dimensions and how they are so cool because they're just an isolated little area. This was one that was created by these thought creatures. And all the rules can apply there, but then it doesn't bleed out into anywhere else. Same thing here in a single room. And oftentimes in that pocket dimension concept, it's a place you are teleported to or trapped in or whatever. But again, it doesn't have to be. And the final thing I would say here is you also want to let the environment of a single room dungeon tell a story. Whether it's the tapestries on the wall, whether it's whatever lives in the pool or in the crypt, whatever the throne, whatever gods it speaks to, where is their information? A single room library carved out of these cliffs. Remember the cliff faces in Indiana Jones? And I think they're in Egypt, I think, or somewhere. And you go in and there's this library, single room library. Well, what's in there? Why is it there? Are the books still there? Are they all gone? Are there only a few tomes left or what? That tells a story. Why was this built here? This remote place. Why are the books are perfectly preserved, right? Then when you try to leave, you can't, and you realize, oh, we're going to be perfectly preserved as well, right? So let the environment tell a story, because again, it isn't that tension of now I'm going here, now I'm going there, what's here, oh, we're going to run back there. It's everything is condensed into this room, but the environment needs to be rich with, flavor, but flavor that means something. And combined with being the perfect environment for the ticking clock, I think you can have a lot of fun creating one-room dungeons. And I'm going to be doing that. I'm going to have a lot of fun because I've got like 3 or 4 that I want to do in my series on my Patreon. And a shout out to my Patreon members. I did the Duchy of the Archipelago, this map of all these different islands, and it's kind of a little bit of a mini campaign setting. It was really fun. But anyway, I'd love to hear, do you use one-room dungeons? Give a comment, make a like, or subscribe, all that stuff. Most importantly, as always, my friends, keep playing an RPG game, whichever one you choose, and tell somebody else about it.